What's going on, football fans? It's time once again for another rendition of the Pound for Pound. I'm your host, J.R. Clark, and today we're just going to jump right into it. Here lately I've been seeing a lot of articles and a lot of people tweeting about it on Twitter about the potential of the Atlanta Falcons switching to a 3-4 defense. And I was fully prepared to come on here today and just get right behind that and champion that. Because that sounded like such a great idea. But the more I thought about it and the more I dug into it, the more I'm not so sure about it. Now, the other day, my partner did a really good video and a really good breakdown on Tyler Davidson and his addition to our defensive line and what it may mean for us. He compared him to Paul Soliai, which I think is a really great comparison. Then I got to looking at it today and I got to thinking about it. And I said, what do you need for a 3-4 defense? And what do you need for a 3-4 defense is you need a nose tackle that can take up blocks, right? Because you just have 3 down linemen. I got looking at Tyler Davidson's measurables, and he's very comparable to Grady Jarrett. I think he's only about 2 inches taller than Grady Jarrett. Now, this is according to Pro Football Reference. It's not like I went in there with a tape measure and measured these guys, you know. But they got Tyler Davidson listed as 6'2", and Grady Jarrett listed as 6 foot flat. And they're both hovering right around that 300-pound mark. So, in my mind, I don't envision Grady Jarrett as a nose tackle. I envision Grady Jarrett as a penetrating 3-tech, defensive tackle. You know, so it would be hard for me to think that somebody who at least has the same measurables as Grady Jarrett is going to come in and be a nose tackle. So then that got me thinking, well, without a serious nose tackle, it's really hard to pull off a 3-4 defense, right? So I examined the things that led people to think that we may be switching schemes. Number one, The Athletic had an article where Dan Quinn said he went back and looked at over 6,000 snaps from his defense from the time even when he was back in Seattle. And he looked at how the NFL's offenses started to attack his defense over the years. Which routes they were using, things like that, right? And what became more prevalent as the years went on. Because when the season was over, you know, a lot of people want to hang it on the fact that we lost basically the middle of our defense to injury, and we did. I'm not even going to lie, we did. But Dan Quinn felt like that it wasn't just the lack of players. It was also, you know, coaching and the scheme needed to be tweaked. So he took care of the coaching part by letting Marquand Manuel go. We're going to see if that was the right decision or not. I'm not 100% sold on that. I think Marquand Manuel was doing a good job. And after the 2017 season, he was lauded as an up-and-coming defensive mind. Or, you know, potential, even was starting to get rumored in like potential head coach type searches because of the job he did with the defense. So I'm not ready necessarily to hang it on Marquand Manuel unless Marquand Manuel wasn't able to make the adjustments he needed when he lost the players. That could be a problem. And that could be enough for Dan Quinn to say, okay, I got to let you go. Me personally, I think that they needed a scapegoat, as a lot of people and a lot of teams need scapegoats at the end of the year. I think he just got caught up in that, but that's my opinion on him. So Dan Quinn says he sat down, locked himself in a room, locked himself in a vault, and watched 6,000 defensive snaps to figure out how his defense was getting torn apart. How was he ranked, you know, low ends on the pass and the run and stuff of that nature. So he's talking about, you know, basically adding new wrinkles and adding new tweaks to his scheme, because your schemes, they got to evolve. I mean, if you don't evolve your scheme, you're going to get picked apart. And that's offensive and defensive. As the years go on, everybody it's a balancing act back and forth. So I would hope that he would do that, especially after the season that we had last year. So he locks himself in a vault, and he notices that he doesn't necessarily have the guys to pull off that 4-3 under like he wanted. Or more or less what I feel is that the league has caught up to that 4-3 under. Because you can even look at Seattle and Baltimore and see them, tweaking their 4-3 unders as well. I think it has more to do with the coverage on the back end, but I believe my partner is going to dive into that here, hopefully here soon. But back to what I am looking at, what I'm thinking about. Let's look at what we got on the defensive line, right? You got the Tyler Davidson, you got Grady Jarrett, and you got Deidre Sanat. All are similar in stature. Sanat seems to be more of a run stuffer. Grady Jarrett seems to be more of a penetrator. And I'm not 100% sure on Davidson yet. All the reports is that he seems more like a hold up on run stop and hold his gap kind of guy, right? Now you've also brought in your inside out guys, your versatile guys who could play defensive tackles, guys who could play defensive end. That's your Jack Crawford, that's your Rasheed Hagman, and that's your Adrian Claiborne's, right? And then the 4th round pick, Kaminsky. Those guys seem to be where they can shift back and forth between defensive tackle and defensive ends. And this brings up yet another point I think that Dan Quinn is really looking for, and that's versatility. He's said it year after year since he's been here. And I think you're seeing even further proof of that with the reports coming out that Takk McKinley is doing linebacker drills. That was the early part of OTAs, right? That's something else to keep your eye on when you're reading this stuff coming out of training camp, or if you get a chance to even go up to training camp. Keep an eye on Takk and Vic and see what they're doing. See who they're drilling with. Are they drilling with the linebackers? Are they drilling with just strictly defensive ends? Bring me back to another point that I was thinking about. If we switch to a 3-4 base, now Takk McKinley and Vic Beasley become outside linebackers. Now, as outside linebackers, your main job is to rush the passer. But every now and again, you got to drop into coverage. Because you have those duties as a linebacker. So, that's one thing that McKinley was working on was, I believe, was coverage drills. Now, Vic Beasley in 2017 spent time dropping into coverage. And this brings me to another somewhat fault in fully switching to a 3-4. At least this year anyway. Because after the 2017 season, Dan Quinn straight up said that they were going to basically move Beasley back to defensive end. That's what he was, and he was going to rush the passer. Well, are you going back on that now? Are you going back on the fact that you wasn't really all that happy with Beasley dropping into coverage? And you wanted him strictly focused on rushing the passer? If that's the case, then, his versatility is limited. And he may not be here after this year anyway. So maybe Quinn is like, whatever. We'll get somebody else after this year. But you would figure that he's going to try to take this year to salvage Big Beasley because he is a former first-round pick and they didn't bring anybody in really for depth. You can say they brought in Adrian Claiborne, but they already know what they have in Claiborne. They let him walk up to the Patriots and get a ring. Now he come back on a $2 million deal, which is great for us, but, he's happy he's got his ring. Couldn't get it with us, went to the Patriots, got one with them. So, needless to say, I honestly feel like what you're going to see is Dan Quinn is probably going to be more of, and I hate to even say it like this, more of a multiple defense. That was something that Mike Smith used to tout back when he was here. And I felt like multiple defense equaled, we're not really good at anything. We're just going to try everything. So, that kind of makes me a little wary on the idea of a hybrid defense or a multiple defense. But you're already kind of running a hybrid defense anyway with that 4-3 under. That 4-3 under is a 4-3 defense with 3-4 personnels and 3-4 personnel looks. So why not go all the way to full on 3-4? I mean, you did hire Bob Sutton. He's the one that installed the 3-4 in Kansas City this last time around. You hired him as a senior assistant. So why not just convert? Ultimately, Dan Quinn's preached the whole time he was here, I want to put players in the best position to succeed. And I think he is trying, I mean, he's sticking to that. That's his philosophy. So he's going to get a couple series of attack dropping into coverage to see how he looks doing that, to see if that's another wrinkle that he can add. You know, maybe on a snap you have tack drop into coverage, but then you have Devondre Campbell blitzing. I think what I feel like you're going to get out of Dan Quinn defense in 2019 is more exotic looks. That's what I feel like you're going to get. Because in 2016, when Dan Quinn took over for Richard Smith and we started to make our run, I remember people, commentators, talking heads, talking about the fact that Dan Quinn wasn't necessarily running his scheme that he was known for with the cover 3 and the zone coverage. That he was running more man-to-man. He was doing more twists and stunts. Hell, we beat Seattle's offensive line like a drum with twists and stunts. We did that with players like Ben Garland on the defensive line. So, I think that's what you're going to see this year. I think you're going to see a lot more exotic looks, a lot more, blitzes out of Dan Quinn, a lot more timely blitzes, which he's always been real good at since he's been here, dialing up a blitz at the right time. So I think what you're seeing is Dan Quinn preparing for that by, dropping or getting Takk McKinley the reps he needs to feel comfortable dropping him into coverage. So, because ultimately all you're really trying to do is confuse the offense. You give them one look and then do something different. Because these quarterbacks, other than unless it's a rookie, these quarterbacks, man, they've seen it all. When you're going up against guys like Breeze and Brady up front and Phillip Rivers and guys like that, they've seen it, man. So you got to try to confuse them. You got to try to take a look that looks the same and do something completely different out of it. So I think that's what you're going to see this year. Those are the types of things that I think that Dan Quinn's going to do. I believe his backbone or his foundation is still going to be in that 4-3 under. That's what he's used to. That's what he's comfortable with. But he's brought in a guy like Bob Sutton to help him with some 3-4 looks. And, so that way he can mix it up. I mean, for what it's really worth, you spend more time in your nickel anyway, so it doesn't really matter what your base is. Whether your base is a 3-4 or a 4-3, none of that really matters because you spend more time with 5, 6, and hell, even 7 defensive backs on the field to make up for this explosion of passing that we've seen these past few years. Plus, when you got a guy like DeMonte Casey, who tied for the lead in the league with 7 interceptions last year, you've got to get him on the field as much as you can. He just happens to have a nose for the ball, right? So you let Brian Poole walk to keep DeMonte Casey, so now you got to put him on the field. I think Dan Quinn realizes he could not made a mistake, but realized that DeMonte Casey is a cornerback. He tried to make him a safety, and, he did okay last year with Ricardo going down, but that dude's a corner, and that's what he needs to be playing. So I feel like that's where we're at, and that's where we're headed. It's not necessarily going to be a 3-4 or a 4-3. I think if you had to nail it down, it's going to be a 4-3 under that plays a lot of nickel. And in those nickel looks, you could have, if you got Vic and Takk dropping into coverage every now and again, now you can rush from any platform. I went back and watched some college tape from both Vic and Takk. And both of them are good at rushing from a 3-point stance and a 2-point stance. So the platform shouldn't be much of a problem for them. So with that being said, you could launch them from anywhere. And if you can get the quarterback thinking, okay, is this guy rushing or is he dropping? Or if you got him convinced that he's rushing and then he drops and Devondre comes, now you're starting to mix it up. Now you're starting to get that quarterback second guessing. And if you can get him to second guess even for a split second, then that may be enough to cause a fumble, to actually get the sack, or what have you. So I think these are the things that we're going to be looking for this year. I think it's going to have more exotic looks, more timely blitzes, and yes, I think you're going to see Vic and Tack, drop into coverage from time to time. And they may drop into coverage in favor of Dion and Devondre blitzing at the same time. I think you're going to start to see a more creative defense this year, because I believe Quinn has seen that the rest of the NFL not caught up to him, but figured out ways to beat his defense. And so, he challenged himself with coming up with a better scheme and coming up with a more creative scheme to make use of the players that he has and to put them into positions to succeed, because that seems to be his number one creed and his number one motto. I don't know about y'all, but I'm really excited to see what he comes up with. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.